Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're here at Chaparral Motorsports today, and whether you have a new or used motorcycle, it's always good to take a second to take care of your bikes. So today we're going to show you how to remove and grease your rear linkage and bell crank. So for today's tools, you can usually get away with sockets. You may need some end wrenches as well though. Typically these parts you'll need a 14mm, a 17mm, and maybe even a 19mm. To be able to remove the parts. You'll also need some grease, and sometimes you may need a 10 or 12 to remove some excess parts around the linkage and bell crank. Now we're back here in the shop. We've got our YZ125. First up, I'm going to show you how to remove the link arm, and then we'll get into the bell crank and show you guys how to grease them and put them back together. So here's what we're working with. We have our link arm, which is bolted always to the frame and to the bell crank. Bell crank is mounted in 3 places: to your shock, to your link arm, and then to your swing arm. Now, in this case with the YZ125, the mounting point to the actual swing arm is inside this plug hole. Most bikes you'll actually see this will be mounted down a little bit farther, and your third mount hole will be in this area, but for what we're working with, we have to pop the plugs and get them out of here instead. So for now, I'm using this little box here to help support the rear tire. It's always good to have a little wind block or something here, so when you start taking this out, the swing arm doesn't drop and put pressure or bind up on anything you're about to work on. Okay, so first up, we're gonna go ahead and break loose our linkage here. So we're gonna go ahead and remove our first bolt here. Gonna get fingers on the other side to push through, and take your other hand and pick up a little on the rear tire just to kind of relieve the tension off the bolt. So in the case of the Yamaha here, we have a chain roller that is blocking the way of the front mounting bolt. On some bikes you'll run into this being in the way, some it's exposed and it's fine, and even on some models like certain Hondas you'll find the chain roller will actually be a part of that bolt, so when you pull it the entire piece comes off together. So now that we have the chain roller out of the way and the nut, it's just easier to be able to see back in here and access this. Last up, we're going to slide the pin out. And there's our link arm. Okay, so now we're going to get to getting our bell crank out. Like I said, with this Yamaha swing arm, we actually have one of the nuts and bolts is inside, so we're going to break that loose. Okay, so even though we've removed the nut from the bolt inside the swing arm, we actually don't want to push that bolt out yet. We need it so we have something to hold the bell crank while we break loose our last nut here. If we were to take it out, this would just swing around and you'd be trying to hold it with your hand, which is definitely a pain in the butt. So we're just gonna break loose this last nut here. Push out the bolt there between the shock and the bell crank. Freeze that up. And now the last thing left, because the bolt is inside the swing arm and down in there, I'm gonna use a Allen T-handle to push out. You could use flat blade and extension, just pretty much anything you can put in here, and just push that last bolt out, and now you have a bell crank. Now that we've got our linkage and our bell crank off the bike, we're gonna go ahead and start greasing them. I'm gonna start off with our linkage arm. The YZ one we're working with is pretty simple. Just one long one inside. Sometimes you'll have ones that have a little bit of a cap on each end. Maybe it's got a short cap on one side, you'll pop out and then push out on the other side. Just depends on the model. So now we have that. We have bearing cages on each side of the linkage. We're gonna go ahead and grease those. Gotta be careful every once in a while you run into some older model or some bikes that the bearing cage isn't sealed inside, and bearings will basically be loose and try to fall out when you pull that pin out. So be wary the first time you pull those out. Make sure you don't spill them all over the floor or anything. Once we're all done here, go and slide our pin back in. Nice and greased up. Now that we're done with that one, we'll go ahead and move on to the bell crank. So for our bell crank, there are sleeves inside, but we have little caps basically on each side. You'll see a little line and groove on the inside. Take a little skinny flat blade in there, and just slowly work it in between. Pop the cap out. Now their caps are free. Go ahead and slide our sleeve out. Same thing as last time, we've got 2 bearing cage packs in here on each side. Go ahead and grease those. Make sure when you're in there, you kind of take your finger and you're applying pressure and rolling the bearing cage through its motion and rolling the grease. That way you're spinning all of the rollers inside and getting grease, not only just on the face of them, but actually getting them to spin and take the grease in. Roll it down inside each one. And then of course you're gonna wanna pop the other side, do the exact same thing. When you're done, slide pin back inside. Put your bearing caps back in. Make sure they seal really good in around that. Now that your bell crank and your linkage are ready to go back on, grab your pivot bolts, throw some grease on them, get your nuts, your washers, place them to your manufacturer torque settings, and then if you need some more help, jump on VitalMX.com for more tech tips.